Chris, can you hear me?
Yes, hear you and see you. Go right ahead.
All
15
right.
minutes.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Linda. And thank you to all the attendees that are here today. We appreciate the opportunity to speak and give a lot of information. My name is Eric. I'm an attorney at Judicial Watch. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I'm going to go over a lot of information today in a very short period of time, but I have included my email address on the PowerPoint slides, which I believe, Chris, are you pulling up?
Yes.
Okay.
A lot to do here, so let me get those now.
Okay. I could go ahead and just get started. I have a copy of the slide, but as Chris is working to set it up, I'll just start talking about the first area. Judicial Watch is primarily concerned with the integrity of our nation's voter rolls. And because of that, we want to stop voter fraud, fraudulently cast ballots. And when I say voter fraud, I mean basically fraudulently cast ballots or fraudulent registrations. We are also concerned about registrations that are out of date, but that's not specifically voter fraud, because fraud actually requires a specific intent under the criminal law to commit a crime, like impersonate a voter, double vote, or submit a false registration on someone's behalf. So there is a study, and this is what Linda was talking about with regards to perception management. There was a study by the Washington Post, and the Washington Post is a there it is, and you can see my email at the bottom.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions at all, I'll stick around after the conference, but if you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to email me. I would have also included my phone number as well, but our offices are closed temporarily virus. So the best way to contact me right
Can
now
you
is
hear
by
it
my
over
email.
there?
Yeah, I can hear
Well, then we won't do it. I could try.
Hold on, Eric.
Okay.
Everyone, please
Turn
mute
it down.
yourself. Go ahead, Eric.
So you see my email there. It's elee@judicialwatch.org. And that's the best way to contact me right now if you have any questions. If you could go to the second slide, please. This is what I was talking about just a little bit ago. The fraudulent cast votes and registrations are both specific intent crimes, and that's important because it requires an actual intent to commit the crime. And so a lot of these voter fraud issues do not get prosecuted because the prosecutor
I want
can't
to see how
show
much more there is.
actual knowledge. That's different than general intent crimes, which is just recklessness.
10:30.
This comprehensive study by the Washington Post, that is I put comprehensive in quotes because was not comprehensive at all, in fact. And this is what Linda was talking about with perception management. But
I'll
left,
put it on for a few more minutes, and if it's not anything I don't already know,
Hold on, Eric.
I got a lot to do.
Hold on, Eric. I have to mute some people and perhaps remove them from the meeting because they're not muting themselves. And I'm sorry, but there's 2 or 3 of them now, and I have to work on this before we can proceed.
Okay, that's fine.
All right, let's see. We have Al Lemo, Mike Detling, and Rhonda Hawkins. So let me find them.
Sorry, you have to leave, folks.
Al Lemo is okay. Rhonda, and hold on one second. Mike Detling. Okay, he's all right. And Rhonda Hawkins. Rhonda, okay, muted. Okay, please everyone, mute yourself, camera off. It's the only way this is gonna work. All right, Eric, go ahead.
Okay. So the left likes to take this study by the Washington Post and use it to show that voter fraud is non-existent, because the Post found only 31 credible instances of impersonation fraud over a 14-year period. And they use this study and they say that you're more likely to be struck by lightning than be a victim of a voter fraud. And I like to say, because I've lived in Washington, D.C. area almost my entire life, is that actually you're more likely to be a victim, even if we accept this as true, you're more likely to be a victim of voter fraud than read a credible story from the Washington Post. But I digress. Next slide, please.
Okay, hold on. I
Okay.
lost it. Here we go.
I included on the next slide examples of voter fraud, and this is a non-exhaustive list. This is just instances that have occurred within the last 3 years. And you can see here the magnitude of actual impersonation fraud, false registration going on. And I included a recent example right here in the city of Detroit, where one of the city's clerks was charged with 6 felony counts for altering absentee ballots after the 2018 midterm elections. And you can see other instances going around the country. In 2016, 83 registered voters submitted absentee ballots from a 2-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles County. There were other examples of investigations of possible fraudulent mail-in ballots, fraudulent cast ballots in someone's name after they had died. I could have included 5 slides of all the instances in the last 5 years, but I didn't want to go on. These are available online. The media, the mainstream media, does not want to talk about it because it goes against their narrative that voter fraud doesn't exist. And so that's why I included at the end. The Washington Post almost certainly did not include this in their comprehensive study because it goes against their narrative. And the reason why they don't want voter fraud to exist is they don't want reasonable protections to ensure the integrity of the ballot. Next slide, please. So there's a problem in this country with regards to excessive registration rates. That's the number of voters that are on the official list of eligible voters in these counties, in these townships and states. That can occur either 3 ways. It could occur obviously with fraudulent registration, someone submitting a false registration in someone's name, which occurred in 2017 in Virginia. Down at the bottom, you can see that Harrisonburg Votes, a staffer, it's a political organization affiliated with the Democratic Party, pled guilty to submitting 18 false registrations of deceased individuals. The only way they caught that was that one of the registrations was on behalf of a former judge that had passed away several years ago, and someone in the general registrar's office caught that and said that this cannot happen. So they found the person that was submitting the ballots and then ended up prosecuting. The Department of Justice ended up prosecuting them. The Heritage Foundation also has a study where they have collected across the country of those that have been submitting false registrations, and they have found over 180 convictions just in the last 5-6 years or so. And so you can see that there are false registrations that are going on in this country and are still going on. Now, there are other reasons for the excessive registration rates, and that's unlawful registrations, but that's not necessarily fraudulent, or the local jurisdiction isn't doing enough to keep ineligible voters off the roll, such as change of address, or death. Next slide, please. There was a case in 2018 that went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, and that was a case involving Ohio's list maintenance process, where they would send address verification notices to voters that lacked activity. Now, that was challenged by the group A. Philip Randolph Institute. They're a left-leaning group. They were represented by the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, and they wanted to stop the list maintenance that Ohio was doing. That went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in a 5-4 ruling, said Ohio's list maintenance program was okay under a statute called the National Voter Registration Act, which I'll talk about in a second. But in that opinion, Justice Alito, writing for the majority, noted that there are an estimated 24 million voter registrations across the United States that are either invalid or significantly inaccurate. And this was based on a Pew Report study. And the Pew is a nonprofit organization, and they found that 1 in 8 are in fact invalid or inaccurate. And this is going on everywhere, and it's particularly troubling in Michigan, which I'll talk about in a second. Judicial Watch pulled information online from the U.S. Census Bureau. This is publicly available information It's available to anyone for free for download. You can just go, I included the links on this slide here. We also, and they calculate citizen voting age population for each jurisdiction, each county in the United States. And those are citizens aged 18 and older that are eligible. Those are people that are eligible to vote. So these studies are posted online. You can access them. We use them. They're published every year. We use them to compare it with the registration rates. And the registration statistics are submitted by the state to the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, which is also available for free. We talked this and found that there are roughly 350 to 400 jurisdictions in the United States that have more registered voters than citizens that are eligible to vote. Next slide, please. So in Michigan, we took this study in 2016 because the EAC report releases registration statistics after each federal general election. So in 2016, they released it in 2017. We compared it to the most recent citizen voting age population. And that's what I mean there by CVAP, CVAP, that's citizen voting age population. And we found that there are 50 Michigan counties with more registered voters than citizens eligible. Now, I just recently did that again after the 2018 election because the EAC report publishes statistics every year, every 2 years, and the Census Bureau every year. And although the number has gone down a little bit, there are 44 counties now that have more registrations in CVAP in Michigan. The overall registration rate statewide has gone up because there are additional 15 counties now with registrations between 97 and 99.9%. That is exceedingly high for a jurisdiction. And these are the most recent numbers that the Michigan is submitting to the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, and the Census Bureau is conducting extensive surveys under the American Community Survey to get this information. So these are accurate statistics. And the left likes to say they don't know where we get this information. Well, it's available online. Next slide, please. These are just some of the examples of the largest Michigan counties that are currently over 100%. I'm not going to go over each one, but you can see that counties such as Oakland or Wayne County in Michigan. Oakland County, for instance, has 40,000 more registrants than citizens eligible. And Wayne County also has almost, almost 1.3 million total registrants. They have 20,000 that are more registrants than citizens eligible. And so you can see the issue going on in these counties. Next slide, please. So how does this happen? Well, we talked about the false registrations. That's certainly a part of it. But more so, it's a failure of these jurisdictions to follow the National Voter Registration Act and federal and state law to remove voters that have either changed address or have passed away. Now, the removal for change of address under the MVRA is extensive, which I'll talk about in a second. But you can see here that jurisdictions generally, and what we have found, they do not send enough address verification notices. They do not mark voters inactive, which they're required to do under the MVRA after they fail to respond to the notice or its return is undeliverable. And then they don't remove the inactive registrants after 2 federal elections. Now, that all contributes to the excessive registration rates. Next slide, please. So we'll start with the law. What does the law require? Well, I'll start with the best document out there. That's the U.S. Constitution. In Article 1, Section 4 is the Elections Clause. And this basically provides the time, places, and manner for holding elections for state representative, for the senators and representatives shall be prescribed by the state legislature. But Congress has the ability to make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing its senators. Now, this clause basically has 2 functions. You can see it gives the authority to the states to basically, under federalism principles, they shall prescribe the time, places, and manner for holding elections for electing representatives and senators. But it also confers the extensive power on behalf of Congress to alter those regulations or supplant them altogether. And this is in a case, U.S. Term Limits versus Thornton back in 1995, that said that a state's requirement for access to a ballot of term limits was unconstitutional under the Elections Clause. And we challenged this provision in California recently, where they had required presidential candidates to release their tax returns in order to gain access to the ballot. And the district court in that case also held that that was unconstitutional under Elections Clause. The Elections Clause grants enormous power over elections to Congress because in Federalist 58, Alexander Hamilton was concerned, and the framers, in fact, were concerned that the states were acting as their own government and would not send representatives to Congress. And there's a good quote from Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 59, which says that every government ought to contain in itself the means for its own preservation. And an exclusive power of regulating elections for the national government in the hands of the state legislature would leave the existence of the union entirely at their mercy. And so Congress has this enormous power to regulate elections under the Elections Clause. Next slide, please. They have done that in 2 instances regarding election administration. That is the National Voter Registration Act of NVRA. We call this the Motor Voter Law. And you can see there it was passed to encourage eligible citizens to register to vote. But there was a second provision that said that you must ensure the integrity of the official list of eligible voters by doing list maintenance. And I'll talk about it in a second. Congress exempted 6 states from the requirements because they had same-day registration. I don't know why they did that. It doesn't really make sense, but they did that anyways. And then the second one is the Help America Vote Act, HAVA, that was passed after the Bush versus Gore election in 2002. Now that funded mandate for voting machines, list maintenance, and a key here is the centralized voter registration database that each state must contain. They also created the new Election Assistance Commission, where we get the registration rates that I just talked about. Unlike the NVRA, though, there's no private right of action. And so it's enforced solely by the United States Department of Justice. So if the Department of Justice decides not to bring an action, there's really nothing we can do. But the NVRA, the National Voter Registration Act, does provide a private right of action for individuals to sue in federal court. And that's what we do. Next slide, please. Section 8 of the NVRA is called the integrity provision of the NVRA, which requires states to take certain steps to remove ineligible voters. It's said that states must have, and this provision was passed by Congress pursuant to the Elections Clause, so it supplants the state's requirements that were in effect before this provision was passed. It says that a state must make a reasonable effort to remove the names of ineligible voters from the official list by reason of death of the registrant or change in residence of the registrant. Now, there's a problem here. Congress specifically left out non-citizens. And this is a problem because states sometimes don't have any program at all to remove non-citizens. And some states do whatever they want to do. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is the problem with Section 8 right now. The statute, it was a case in Florida in Broward County that went to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, just recently issued in last year, challenging Florida's non-removal of non-citizens, among other things. And they went, the district court said that Florida is not required to remove non-citizens. They can do so if they please, but Congress chose not to require that. They appealed that to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and this is one of the judges was a Trump appointee, and they unanimously affirmed, saying that Congress chose, and I have the list, the quote here. It said that Congress chose not to include a provision to remove non-citizens, and so courts, under the principle that they don't want to be judicial activists and be a super legislature, they cannot rewrite a statute that Congress chose not to include. Next slide, please. There are other problems with the NVRA. Now, in 2012, Virginia passed a law that required documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote. The problem is that Section 5 of the NVRA requires each state to accept and use the federal form for voter registration. And as we know, the federal form only requires a checkbox and oath to verify legal citizenship. This is wholly insufficient. It does not provide any safeguard whatsoever for U.S. citizens, for non-U.S. citizens to register to vote. We have seen that routinely in other states that have programs such as Maryland, Virginia. other states that do not have programs, but we get jury services returned back that they are non-citizens, and they get those lists from the registration rolls. But that law in Arizona was challenged in 2013, and it went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in a 6-3 decision by Justice Scalia, said that the Arizona law requiring documentary proof of citizenship was preempted by Section 5 of the NVRA. So not only does federal law not require proof of citizenship requirement, it actually prohibits it as it stands right now. And so only Congress can really change this law, and they have the power to do so under the Elections Clause. Next slide, please.
Eric, are you close to wrapping up?
Yes, I have two more slides.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, so what can you do to prevent voter fraud? In Michigan, the city townships and clerks maintain registration rolls, unlike the county clerks in some states. So you have to inspect your local town's voter registration rolls for accuracy. And how do you do this? Next slide, please. The NVRA provides a great provision to inspect your voter rolls. It has under Section 8I, 20507 I1, it mandates that all records concerning the implementation of programs and activities conducted for the purposes of ensuring the accuracy and currency of the official list of eligible voters shall be disclosed, and the state shall make them available. We use this provision all the time. We send public records requests for the voter rolls for list maintenance activities. And then if they don't give it to us, we can sue because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Next slide, please. You can do this yourself in your local town. Send a written request for the registration records in your township. If you suspect something fraudulent is going on, here are some of the examples of records to request under Section 8I of the NVRA. And so I just provided just some of the lists, but you can, if you feel like non-citizens are registering to vote, you can request records on that. If you feel like people are registered out of state, coming into state, you can request records on that as well. You can request records on list maintenance under sending the address confirmation notice and failure to vote, or the records on deceased names and address to see if that your jurisdiction is removing them. Or you can just request an official list of eligible voters itself to see if there are old registrations, people that are registered at commercial addresses, or people that are over 120, 130 years old. That's something you can do, and just send a public records request. And I'm more than willing to help and give you a sample if you'd like. Next slide, please. That's it. I thank you very much for your opportunity to explain this. I know there's a lot of information, so I included my email. I encourage each and every one of you to email me or email Linda or Chris and ask for the information. I'm more than willing to help and give that to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. We've announced that your slides will be distributed afterwards. So
Perfect. Thank
thank
you.
you again for your presentation. Okay, folks, let me check some messages and we'll go on.